point of view, it's important to remember that the market, the way that individuals interact with each other, that's a naturally inclusive format. The state is naturally exclusive. I think that as we see a separation between people that are allowed to interact with each other on a peer-to-peer basis and those that are allowed to interact with the central authority, I think that separation will come, but I think it'll be driven mostly by the state. Another important idea that I found useful, that led to me suddenly asking a lot more questions, is the idea of who controls the truth. When you grow up in America, as I'm sure in lots of other societies where there's a government-controlled school, you're taught and you're encouraged to believe that the government gets to decide what's the truth and what's not the truth. They fund the schools, they fund the scientists, they fund engineering programs, and most importantly, they fund a court system that gets to write the laws. You are told that you're not to question those laws once they're written and once they become part of the central edict. They're now defined as the truth, and who are you as a mere individual to have your own opinion about what the truth is and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. I don't have a complete answer for this that I think will satisfy everybody that might be in my target audience, especially objectivists. They don't like this idea that there might be some things that are subjective, some things that depend very much on your view as an individual. Of course, Misesians, they're used to the idea of subjective value, that each individual has his own idea of what different goods and services are worth. So I'd still like to pick that apart and find out exactly what the interplay is between subjectivity and objectivity so that I can explain this to lots of people and have them identify with it. Sorry, screen went to sleep. But I think it's an important question to ask at this stage. Who controls the truth? If we take the subjective idea that each individual has their own perception of the truth, and that each individual can decide for themselves what they accept as true and what they don't accept as true. This is an idea that is the same one that Galileo had to grapple with when he was trying to decide whether what he observed with his own eyes was true or whether what the Catholic Church at the time told him was true. And it's an important one because as soon as we decide that the government does not control the truth, and perhaps no one controls the truth, then that suddenly lets us ask a lot of questions that we never could ask before. Why are things the way they are? How could they be better? It suddenly gives us a lot more choices. We might find that some of the questions we ask, that we are quickly convinced that there's a large tradition, a large body of thought, that what we have been told is true is indeed the most likely thing that we believe in, makes the most sense to us. But there's also the opportunity to suddenly discover that something we had always assumed had to be there could suddenly be different. That gives us a lot of creativity, and that gives us a lot less stress also. I decided that a lot of my need to go grab people by the collar and convince them that things weren't the way that they were being told, the way they were on television and in schools, wasn't so important anymore. Yes, it's unfortunate. A lot of people believe that's true. Yes, that gets used against me. It reduces my market and increases the number of people that might attack me. But ultimately, I have my life. I can decide how to live it. I can trust my perceptions and my ability to reason as good as possible. And I make my decisions to act based upon that. Another idea that I've been toying with differently, that, again, it's a question. Some of you in the audience may disagree with it, and some of you may agree with it, but It's something that I've found affects the way I think about starting different businesses and addressing different needs that are out there in society. And that's following a discussion a little while ago on LouRockwell.com. I realized that I am not an abolitionist. There was a discussion between people who understandably said the state is such an evil entity. It kills millions of people in its different forms. It spends trillions of dollars. An organization that's so evil must surely be abolished, must be wiped from the face of the earth, and we cannot rest until such has been achieved. I understand the evil that can come out of central control. Sometimes it breaks my heart when I think of the pain that it causes, but ultimately we don't need to destroy the state. All we need to do is defend ourselves against it. We can try and find ways to organize our life so that that harm that is done isn't done to us, and when we find that, we can assume that there are people out there in the market for our services that share those needs for security from attack by large organizations. And we can start finding ways to trade with them, to enrich ourselves, and to improve their lives because they choose to improve their lives by using our services. An advantage of this idea is that one of the issues I have with the state as a term is that it talks about one single state. And that's the end game for governments, for monopolies of force, for large coercive organizations. But often you won't be attacked from a single direction. You don't have to worry about assaults on your liberty or your person or your property from a single organization. Crime exists out there in many different forms, from the unorganized to organized crime to a state that tries to claim legitimacy for its organized acts of crime. If you decide that to destroy one of those organizations will suddenly make you free, you have to consider what might happen with all the other organizations that exist out there. You may be vulnerable to attack from them just because you have perhaps brought down one large empire in the Soviet Union. You have to worry about what about other empires that exist out there? What if they suddenly become strong and can attack me? Even if the next one falls, you have to worry after that. What if there's an organized crime gang that's trying to establish its legitimacy? Am I vulnerable to them? When you concentrate on the enemy and concentrate on the idea of destroying the enemy, you make yourself vulnerable because you make yourself a target for that enemy to attack you, to try and protect their empire. But also you become blind to other ways that you might be attacked. So I find it useful to consider not the idea that I have to go out there and figure out a way to remove one particular aggressor from the world, but that I need to figure out how to protect myself, and that other people probably share this need around the world to figure out how to protect themselves against acts of aggression. Again, that opens up all sorts of opportunities to consider new alternatives and look for new ways to solve these problems. I'd like to discuss now something. I'm bringing a picture up on the screen. Ways that we can use businesses, ways that we can use private companies that don't claim that legitimacy for having a monopoly on force. Let's consider a law firm A. And when I call it a law firm, I don't mean as in perhaps today's world, that they study law as positively defined by a monopoly state. I mean, they discover law. They suggest ways that individuals can avoid and resolve conflicts with each other without aggression. So we're looking at a way that we could organize our life without the state. We have law firm A. Law firm A, let's say, decides that it is legitimate, it is non-aggressive to create contracts between parties where they limit their liability for other parties. So let's say they produce a contract with limited liability, and let's assume on the other hand there's a competing law firm B. That law firm believes that such contracts, perhaps in subtle ways, but eventually can lead to acts of aggression, to rights violation, if we use the language of rights. So they only produce contracts that avoid that limited liability clause. Even today we have competition between different organizations, different states. And when I was in South Africa, they didn't use English law, they used Roman Dutch law. Whenever we brought contracts from America for American goods and services, and I would resell them in South Africa, we quickly realized that there were clauses that had to be removed. Under Roman Dutch law, for example, they don't believe in such a thing as an agreement to make a future agreement. They believe that you went outside the bounds of the contract if you decided that there would be agreement between the two parties in the future. So even today we have this competition between different forms of law, but it tends to be protected by armies and claimed as the one true way of doing things. In our future free society, we imagine that there can be private companies that have these differences of opinion about the law. We might have, say, two parties that decide to contract with each other using this contract for limited liability. And perhaps they bring in as another party to the contract insurer C, who provides protection against damages that might occur to people outside the contract that aren't named in the contract. And perhaps there's terms for doing that. I don't particularly have an opinion at this stage whether such a thing is right or wrong. I just say that it exists as a possible difference of opinion that different law firms might have. As things tend to do in the world, stuff happens, and there's some third party who incurs damages by the operation of the venture between the two parties with the limited liability contract. That party contacts his insurer, D, files a claim against his insurer. That insurer perhaps makes a payout to his client, but then goes back to insurer C and says, hey, the monies that you are paying me on behalf of my client for the damages that were done to him aren't sufficient. I'd like to discuss this with you. I'd like to try and resolve the matter because I don't believe that you had the right to operate within that contract the way you did. They might try and find an arbitrator to solve that problem between them. Perhaps there's an insurance ratings board or a professional society to which they belong. Perhaps they informally find an arbitrator. They try and resolve things that way, and perhaps that doesn't work. So they go out, and they each find an advocate. Perhaps insurer C finds advocate F, who went to University G, where they taught law according to law firm A. Insurer D, he finds an advocate H, who perhaps went to University I, where they study law firm B. Those two advocates start putting together the case for each of the positions. They start discussing things formally with each other. They try and find a judge, J, that can hear their case, that's impartial, that can produce the sort of opinion that they want to resolve between them. That judge perhaps Judge J